Do you ever think about what a technological wonder CD and DVD technology really was? Barely more than a millimeter wide, but with microscopic pits that can be read by lasers, converting them into just about anything in the audiovisual spectrum you can imagine. Music, video games, all from what is essentially the same idea as a record player, at a scale so small that, to the human eye, it looks perfectly smooth. And all of this has been used for years, for a game that was meh at best. Sonic the Hedgehog CD. Yes, that's its legal title, but I'm pretty sure even its most aggressive parents wouldn't use the full name. Sonic CD was originally released late in 1993 on the 23rd of some month for the Sega Genesis's CD add-on accessory. It was later ported to PC in 1996, a version of which was then ported over to GameCube and PS2 via the Sonic Gems collection. As mentioned in the intro for the series, I'm not covering the Christian Whitehead remakes of any of the games, but the one for Sonic CD is actually notable, as unlike the others, it was made available on multiple different platforms long before Sonic Origins, including PS3, Xbox, and even Steam. Yes, this is a game with two entirely different official PC versions, not even counting whatever the fuck is going on with Origins these days. The game's legacy in the series is interesting, as despite being the least commercially successful of the classic entries and arguably the most obscure, it's still extremely important for introducing Sonic's longest-standing love interest / stalker, Amy Rose, as well as the most iconic and successful iteration of Metal Sonic. However, while Stardust Speedway recurred a number of times and Sonic Mania even had another level based on CD, I kind of get the impression that this game isn't entirely canon, at least as much as the characters are. It didn't get a full level in Sonic Generations, and as you'll see when we discuss the plot, it's strange. Though then again, the whole game is kind of strange. You'll see what I mean as we go on. For what it's worth, I think there are a lot of oddities I found in this game that mostly come down to the weird double porting that the version I played went through. Things like an MS Paint loading screen and the weird quick cut back to a checkpoint after death are probably relics of the PC port, while apparently some graphical issues were introduced via the Gems collection. The Sonic Gems collection in general is an odd little package. It's basically just Sonic Mega Collection, but with all the old Sonic games that weren't important or good enough for that title. Also, regardless of whether I chose to display in progressive mode or not, the UI for the menus looked really bad. I don't know if it's an issue with the Wii or my TV, or if the game might just look like that. Also, when we get to the presentation, I'm going to be talking about the music I actually listened to, which in this case is the North American soundtrack. Feel free to tell me how much better the Japanese one is in the comments, because I could really use a flame war to stoke the engagement. If you watched my Sonic 2 review, you might already know one issue the game faced right from the start of development. Namely, that lead programmer and overall guider of Sonic 1's creation, Yuji Naka, had fucked off across the Pacific to live it up in San Francisco, and he took the majority of Sonic Team with him. However, with Sega of Japan working on the Sega CD, they wanted a Sonic game to show off that system's technical capabilities. Naoto Oshima, the original designer of the Blue Quill's Golden Boy, was chosen to helm the project, while most of his team was made of developers from the Shinobi, Golden Axe, and Streets of Rage series. Originally, it was planned to just be a port of the original Sonic the Hedgehog with a few enhancements, but ultimately it ended up becoming its own game, though the completely unoriginal name stuck around. According to Oshima, it's not really a sequel to Sonic 1 or 2, though the special stage designer and Tales creator, Yasushi Yamaguchi, said the story may be set between the two games. That idea is actually something that's been semi-canonized, since Sonic Origins places CD right between 1 and 2, both in its UI and in the combined story mode. In any case, while the developers of Sonic 2 decided to prioritize and elaborate on the speed elements of Sonic 1, CD's developers decided to focus more on the platforming and exploration aspects. An interesting decision, given his speed is literally in the name. Apparently, Sonic CD didn't have as much of a nightmarish development cycle compared to Sonic 2. Since it wasn't a numbered sequel, Sega seemingly didn't feel as much of a need to pressure the team to stick to a tight schedule, hence, I assume, the 1993 release date. It's difficult to say the game was a commercial failure, since the original version did sell over 1 million copies, over half of the number of Sega CDs sold, and easily the most in the add-ons library. But that's not really saying much considering the Sega CD itself was something of a flop. Critical reception for the game was overwhelmingly positive, though not as universally beloved as the prior two entries. While both of those mostly got 9s out of 10s across the board, Sonic CD wavered a bit more between the 8s and 10s. It especially received praise for its soundtrack, though the American soundtrack was less than praised. Overall though, most people really appreciated Sonic CD, especially at the time and even in hindsight. As for my own opinion, This is going to be Mario 3 and A Link to the Past all over again, isn't it? Look, I don't think Sonic CD is necessarily terrible, and I will freely admit, some of the issues I had with it might just be down to the specific port I played through this time around. From what I remember of the Whitehead versions, I didn't have a terrible time there, and to be perfectly honest, I didn't absolutely hate my time with it on GameCube. I just don't think it's necessarily all that good, personally, though, of course, my taste is both highly subjective and objectively wrong. I mean, have you seen my other reviews? The story is technically more present in the game itself this time around, with a beginning and ending cutscene, but neither of those cutscenes have any dialogue. The opening scene basically just shows Sonic arriving at the location for the game, Little Planet, and the closing mostly covers him getting Amy out of danger and then a montage of the previous levels. There is also the appearance of Amy in sprite form in a couple of locations, as well as occasional projectors displaying Metal Sonic. From all this, we have a kidnapping in the second level, a rescue in the penultimate level, and a race against a robotic clone of our hero. Usually for games of this era, this is where we would turn to the manual for a little more information, but, well... Okay, so in the last couple of reviews, I mentioned that the manuals for Sonic 1 and 2 were kinda iffy translation work from the original Japanese. Changing Dr. Eggman to Dr. Robotnik is a change that, while it has led to a lot of really obnoxious fanboys crying heresy, ultimately comes off as mostly harmless, if occasionally confusing. And if the English manual had just changed Amy's name to, like, Rosalind or something, I honestly wouldn't have cared that much. Sure, it might have opened a brand new black hole of discourse from which the fandom may never escape, but it's the Sonic fandom. There are already, like, 20 of those. But for some reason, in the English versions of the manuals, they changed Amy Rose, aka Rosie the Rascal, to Princess Sally. Princess Sally, a lead character in the Sonic Saturday Morning cartoon and the Archie Sonic comics, is a brown squirrel / chipmunk / fox who, in some early development media, was pink with black hair. She is not, in any way, shape, or form, the pink hedgehog in a green skirt who chases Sonic around. I don't know how you make that mistake. Even ignoring the other media where Sally actually appears, I feel like it would change the story of this game at least some if the girl you're trying to rescue is a princess. In the actual plot, Little Planet is a small star / planet which appears above a lake for 1 month every year, which also houses the mysterious Time Stones. Yes, the Time Stones, gems capable of controlling time itself. You can already understand why I said this plot doesn't actually seem canon to other games in the series. Dr. Eggman, I'm not doing the portmanteau thing this time, decides to take control of Little Planet for himself, presumably because of the absurd power of the Time Stones. He also has a new robot built to antagonize the Hedgehog hero, namely Metal Sonic, designed to be superior or equal to Sonic in every way. Furthermore, according to the Japanese character profiles, an 8-year-old girl named Amy Rose, also called Rosie the Rascal, has decided to come to Little Planet herself because of a card reading telling her to, which leads to the kidnapping scene in-game. Interestingly, neither manual nor the game cinematic makes mention of Sonic needing time travel himself, or the fact that Eggman has seemingly already gone into the past and placed robot generators around the place. I guess technically you don't have to do any time traveling even to get the good ending, but it is odd that they don't address in the plot that you can. So, you see what I mean about the plot being weird, right? Even by this series standards. It would be disingenuous to claim there are any plot holes with later games, since technically nothing from the original Japanese manual is actively contradicted. I mean, with what little we know about the Phantom Ruby, it seems like there might just be a ton of magical gemstones scattered all across whatever world the Sonic franchise takes place in any given day. However, Little Planet's existence only ever really comes up again in Sonic 4, which itself is questionably canon, and Sonic Mania, which is sort of been semi-retconned as a separate timeline / dimension. Really, the only indication that the game isn't completely non-canon is Metal Sonic's design, the generation's callback to Stardust Speedway, and, of course, Amy being the honorary 4th member of Team Sonic. Otherwise, very little of this game has ever reappeared in later titles, and I don't just mean from the plot. But before we get into the odd new gameplay additions, let's take a look at the presentation. Much like the first game, Sonic CD was built to be a technical marvel, and it does show in the graphics. A lot of bright, vibrant, and clashing colors. Every level has 4 different palettes and appearances. It's a very advanced-looking game, but I wouldn't say it's a visually appealing game. Don't get me wrong, the opening sequence is gorgeous, and I can appreciate the amount of effort that went into the level graphics, but it can occasionally look just a little bit too cluttered. Like, in some levels, the backgrounds can be difficult to tell from actual level elements. Railings, girders, even when the background isn't as distracting, it's still more than a bit of a visual overload. I understand what they were going for here, but it's a bit too much for my own taste. There was also a single instance in the first level with a pseudo 3D set piece, and special stages are in full Wolfenstein-style 3D, though this really isn't terribly impressive considering Sonic 2 does the same 3D special stage gimmick.
Though it also doesn't help that the special stages are kind of lame. They aren't terrible, but they don't really communicate that hitting the water takes away a huge chunk of the time limit, and actually hitting the UFOs you're chasing after can be annoyingly fiddly. Also, you have to get to them the same way as in Sonic 1 by reaching the end of a non-boss level with 50 rings and jumping into the ring, which is arguably even more difficult here than in that game.
The sound, meanwhile, is, well, it's more advanced than the other Genesis titles. Mostly it's just because of the higher storage capacity of CDs themselves, though I guess the CD add-on itself might also be doing something to make the sound better. As for the music, like I said, I had to listen to the US soundtrack throughout, and the music was just not really anything special to listen to. At best it's fine, at worst it's really ill-fitting. The boss music in particular, which sounds like a horror theme, which doesn't exactly fit with Mega Man Robotnik's whole clownish demeanor. The exception is, of course, Sonic Boom, the ridiculously catchy and much beloved song that plays under the opening cutscene and title screen, which I'm pretty sure led to the Crush 40 supremacy of the adventure era and YouTube's own hometown hero, Nathan Sharp, appearing as a singer in Frontiers. Also, again, this might just be because of the specific version of the game that I played, but I feel like the sound effects were way louder and higher in the mix than they should have been.
Fun fact, unlike the other classic Sonic games, collecting the speed-up power-up plays a unique piece of music rather than just speeding up the level music that's already playing. I don't honestly know why they made that choice, but I mean, it's at least clearer when the power-up runs out.
Finally, we get to the gameplay, ostensibly the most important part of this video game, and it's not great. The game is built off the same engine as Sonic 1, and from what I could tell, the physics and controls have all the same issues as that game did. The same sort of stubborn momentum, making Sonic hard to stop or change direction, that sort of thing. There are two more abilities here though, one of which being the Spin Dash, technically introduced in Sonic 2. The other is the Super Peel Out, an even faster takeoff move that has the disadvantage of leaving Sonic vulnerable when initially taking off. They're both okay. The Spin Dash is a bit nerfed as you are vulnerable to attack while revving up, and you have to rev up for a little bit to actually dash, unfortunately, but the Super Peel Out is easy enough to curl into a ball after performing. The control isn't great, but it's at least not as frustrating to gain speed when required.
However, we have more gameplay quirks than just the moves. Ladies, gentlemen, and comrades against the binary, time travel keeps appearing in my hyperfixations.
Scattered around the levels are, traffic signs, I guess. They're labeled either past or future, allowing the player to travel between a few different versions of each level. The main one you arrive in, at least for the first and second parts, is the present version of the level, the default state you'd assume exists around the time Sonic is actually, alive. Hitting one of the signposts and then maintaining a high speed for long enough will send Sonic into either the past or the future. The different time periods have not only different appearances, with the past being either prehistoric or, for the more mechanized areas, under construction, but also some critical changes to layout and level design. It's not just decorative either. The past versions all have a hidden robot generator which, if all destroyed, will give the player a good ending. Breaking the generator will also change the future version of the level from a dystopian polluted hellhole to a still mechanized but prettier and livelier version. These future versions actually have the exact same layouts, but the good future doesn't have any enemies aside from boss fights, so win there I guess. Interestingly, if you collect all 7 time stones, all the robot generators are automatically destroyed, and the good future is made the default future. So I guess Eggman really hasn't traveled into the past yet, but if Sonic doesn't collect the stones, Eggman definitely will. I don't.
Predestination paradox aside, this is a fairly interesting idea for a game-wide gimmick. Having 4 different versions of almost every level is really impressive. You can tell they really wanted to show off just how much game they could pack onto CDs, because these are not small levels to have 4 replicas built of. However, I will admit, while the idea is cool, the execution is a little iffy, and not just because of the weird story implications. I mean, to get to the good future without the time stones, you need to find a past signpost in the present, build up and keep enough speed to time travel, and then find and destroy the robot generator. You have to do that for 14 different levels, and I'm sorry, that is not something I'm about to do without infinite lives. It doesn't help that the levels on their own are just not that good.
Look, I could try and give a rundown of each and every round, as this game calls them, like I did the zones in Sonic 1 and 2, but quite frankly, I don't have that much to say, because they all left basically the same impression on me. and that impression was not all that good. They all feel like mazes that were slapped together almost randomly, somehow forcing precision in platforming despite rarely having particularly dangerous obstacles to avoid. That describes basically every damn level. Palm Tree Panic, the level with the most rings that spawn inside the terrain, which makes it feel the most like it was arranged completely by AI. Collision Chaos, the casino level that feels more like Springier than Casino Nights, and that is not a compliment. Tidal Tempest, better than Labyrinth Zone, in the same way I'm a better person than my dad. In case it wasn't obvious, I do still hate myself. Quartz Quadrant, bland, forgettable, confusing, and barely a theme to speak of. Wacky Workbench, the most annoying and confusing level, not because it's difficult, but because you have no idea what's going on half the time. Stardust Speedway, I like the themes, and it has the most cathartically fast sections of the whole game, but the whole background-foreground yellow panels thing is just annoying. Finally, Metallic Madness, the most complicated and obnoxiously difficult level in the full game, yet somehow I like it more than Scrapbane and Metropolis. And then it's the end.
Remember how I spent over half the Sonic 2 review talking about the level design behind its zones? Can you believe this game actually has 3 different acts for its zones? Zones for its rounds.
Now, I'll be fair to this game. It's not as frustrating as Sonic 1. The game is actually almost ridiculously easy, at least in terms of losing lives. The bosses are particularly laughable. The third sections for each level are significantly shorter than those of Sonic 1, and there's almost always an extra life to grab with easy access. Plus, most of the boss fights proper are extremely weak. At least in Egghead's Emerald Hill fight, he took 8 hits to defeat. Here he's lucky if he manages 4. The only fights I had any real trouble with were Tidal Tempest because the rings kept glitching out when I got hit even once, Quartz Quadrant because the whole conveyor belt gimmick is hard to manage, and Metallic Madness because, quite frankly, I was being an idiot. Other than that, literally the only parts I struggled with were figuring out where the hell I was supposed to go, and one section after a checkpoint in Metallic Madness where a crushing hazard was right next to a weird spinning pole with blades. In general, the game was really easy overall, which isn't exactly an improvement over Sonic 1's ball busting because they forgot to add in actual fun.
So, yeah, that's Sonic CD, the cult classic Sonic game that really doesn't deserve its obscurity or its acclaim. Yet again, I'll admit some issues are probably a part of the double port job this version got, like the constant loading screens popping up during time travel. However, for the most part, I just think this game really isn't all that good. It's not engagingly difficult, it's not cathartically fun, and it's not exactly as revolutionary as Sonic 1. It almost feels like a bizarro version of Sonic 1 more so than a different take on a sequel. Sort of like the lost levels to the first game's Super Mario Bros. At the very least, I can say I didn't get as fed up with this game as I did with Sonic 1, so I was able to beat it in one sitting. However, I'm gonna be honest, I still can't really recommend it, especially not this version. It's just not good enough or bad enough to warrant anything more than a glance as a historical curiosity. I'm sorry. Plus, I mean, if Sega didn't think it was worth paying much attention to, why should I?